All right, so for our story today, we're not going to start with some famous king or a big battle. Nope. We're starting in a workshop. It's hot, it's noisy, and you can hear the constant clang of a hammer hitting hot metal. This is where it all begins. The spark of a revolution that's about to completely reshape a subcontinent. Can't you just picture it? Close your eyes and you can almost feel the heat from that fire, hear that noise. This exact scene was playing out all across the Indian subcontinent about 3,000 years ago. And what our friend Prabhakar's watching, well, it's way more than just a couple of guys making tools. He's watching the future get hammered into shape. You see, that glowing piece of metal isn't bronze or copper. It's iron. And once iron tools started becoming common, they kicked off this incredible chain reaction, one that transformed the very landscape, built entirely new kinds of societies, and eventually connected India to the rest of the ancient world. So let's follow that chain, link by link. So how can a simple tool change literally everything? Well, it all starts with the land. The widespread use of iron tools, especially around 2,500 years ago, was an absolute game changer for farming. Yeah, just look at the difference here. Before iron, trying to clear dense forest was a ridiculously hard job. But you give someone a strong iron axe, suddenly you can open up huge new areas for farming. And those old wooden plows, they could barely scratch the surface of heavy soil. But an iron plowshare, oh yeah, that could dig deep. The result was a massive, and I mean massive, explosion in food production. And you know what happens when there's a ton of extra food? Powerful people start to take notice. And this created a whole new dynamic between the rulers and everyone else. It's a pretty logical cycle when you break it down. Kings need cash for their armies and forts, right? So they tax the farmers. But for the farmers to pay up, they have to grow even more food, which means they can't just depend on the rain. They need a steady water supply. They need irrigation. So this kind of partnership forms. The kings put up the money and plans for canals and wells, and the people provide the muscle to build them. Everybody wins. The kingdom gets its taxes, and the villages get more prosperous. Okay, so all this extra food and tax money wasn't just sitting around. It was actually building the foundation for a much more complex society. Let's zoom into the village itself and see who was living there and how it was all organized. As these villages grew, you started to see these really clear social structures pop up, and they were a little different depending on where you were. Up in the north, the big boss was the village headman, the Grama Bojika. This guy was usually the biggest landowner, and he acted as the tax collector, judge, and even a local police. It was a powerful, hereditary job. Below him, you had your independent farmers, the Grihapatis, who owned their own land. And then at the bottom, the landless laborers, the Dasa Karmakara, who did the hard work in other people's fields. Now, if you head south to the Tamil region, you see a pretty similar setup, just with different titles. The big landowners were the Vellalar, the guys actually doing the plowing were the Uzavar, and the landless workers or slaves were the Kadaisiar and Adamai. And you might be wondering, how in the world do we know these specific names from the south? Well, we know them thanks to this incredible collection of writings called Sangam literature. These are some of the very first texts in the Tamil language, written down about 2,300 years ago by assemblies of poets. And what's so amazing about them is that they're not just about kings and gods. They give us this priceless peek into the everyday lives of normal people. So with all these booming villages producing tons of extra food, something else became possible on a big scale for the very first time: cities. The tricky part is, a lot of these ancient cities are buried deep underground or have been built over for centuries. So how do we find out their secrets? Well, this is where we have to put on our detective hats and start looking for clues and stories in the ground and everywhere in between. Our first clue comes from stories like the Jatakas, which were actually written by ordinary folks. I love this one, a story about a poor guy whose only possession is a dead rat. But he's clever, so he sells it to a hotel for a single coin to feed their cat, and that's the start of his fortune. This little story tells us so much. It tells us about a world with hotels, with commerce, with a bustling city economy where a smart person could find an opportunity anywhere. Okay, clue number 2. Let's get our hands dirty and look at what archaeologists have found. They've dug up enormous walls, which tells us these cities were important and needed protecting. And here's something really cool. These things called ring wells. They're basically stacks of big ceramic rings dug into the ground inside people's houses. And what were they for? Toilets, drains, and garbage dumps. It was a surprisingly advanced sanitation system for the time. And when you find pottery like the northern black polished ware, which is so fine it almost looks like metal, you know you're looking at a city with incredibly skilled artisans. Of course, if you've got a busy city with lots of stuff being bought and sold, you need money. Enter the punch-marked coin.
These were the very first coins used in the subcontinent. They didn't have words written on them like ours do. Instead, they were stamped with different symbols. This was a revolutionary idea. It made trade so much easier and allowed it to happen on a much, much bigger scale. And our final set of clues comes from outsiders, the sailors and travelers who actually visited these cities and wrote about what they saw. Their accounts give us this amazing, fresh perspective on just how lively these new urban centers really were. So let's put all those clues together. What made these cities tick? Well, they were these incredible melting pots of skilled craftspeople, local markets, and, as we'll see, long-distance trade. Mathura is the perfect example. This city was a big deal for over 2,500 years. And why? You know the old saying, location, location, location. It was sitting right at the crossroads of major trade routes. But it wasn't just a rest stop. It was a major religious center for Buddhists, Jains, and worshippers of Krishna. And it was a production powerhouse, famous for its beautiful sculptures. Inscriptions tell us about all the people who lived and worked there. Goldsmiths, weavers, blacksmiths, even perfumers. What a place.
Now, these skilled workers didn't just operate on their own. They formed these associations called shrinis, which were kind of like today's professional guilds or unions. And these shrinis were super important. They trained new apprentices, they bought raw materials in bulk, and they handled the distribution of the finished goods. But here's the wildest part. They also acted as banks. Wealthy people could deposit money with a shrini, and the shrini would invest it and use the interest to support local temples or monasteries. That shows a seriously sophisticated level of financial organization.
But trade wasn't always so organized. This beautiful line from a Sangam poem gives us a totally different picture. It reminds us of the human side of it all. Entire families of salt merchants traveling for days in their carts just to trade one essential for another, rice for salt. It's a powerful image. And all of this internal trade, from the salt merchants to the powerful shrinis, was just one piece of the puzzle. These Indian cities were fast becoming essential hubs in a massive web of international trade that stretched all across the known world. Just take a look at the port of Baragaza, which is modern-day Bruch. Thanks to an account from an anonymous Greek sailor, we have this incredible shopping list. Look what's coming in: wine, copper, tin, gold coins from Rome. And what's going out? Himalayan plants, ivory, cotton, silk, perfumes. They even brought special gifts for the king, including fine wines and, get this, beautiful women and singing boys. This wasn't just trade, this was a truly global marketplace. And if you're thinking, okay, that's just a sailor story, well, we have the receipts. At a place called Arakamedu on the southern coast, archaeologists found hard physical proof of this Roman trade. They've dug up a huge warehouse, Roman pottery like these tall jars called amphorae for wine, and this specific type of stamped pottery called Aretine ware that came all the way from Italy. Roman lamps, glass, gems, it was all right there on the Indian coast, proving this connection was very, very real. So let's just quickly retrace our steps. It all kicks off with iron about 3,000 years ago. That sparks an agricultural boom, which leads to the rise of cities and coins around 2,500 years ago. From there, we see this flourishing of culture with Sangam literature, and finally, a direct trade link to a global superpower like Rome. It's an absolutely incredible cascade of cause and effect. The story that started in a blacksmith's shop ended with ships crossing vast oceans. It just goes to show how one single technological jump can ripple out and change everything, from what we eat to where we live to how we connect with the rest of the world. And that really leaves you with one big question, doesn't it? What is the iron tool of our time? What simple innovation today is busy forging the world of tomorrow?